The lonely ride. The sun, a molten disk in the endless sky, beat down on Dusty's worn Stetson. The heat shimmered off the cracked earth, distorting the distant mesas into wavering mirages. Lucky, his trusty buckskin, plodded along, hooves kicking up plumes of fine red dust that painted the horizon in hues of rust and ochre. There wasn't a soul for 100 miles, just the vast, indifferent desert and the ceaseless whisper of the wind. It was how Dusty liked it, mostly. Solitude was a balm, a shield against the ghosts that still flickered at the edges of his vision. He remembered the flames, a hungry orange beast devouring everything he'd ever known. The acrid smell of smoke, the frantic shouts, the screams. He'd been too young, too helpless. The memory was a recurring nightmare, splintered into sharp, agonizing fragments that would occasionally pierce through the quietude of his days. Loss had carved deep valleys in his soul, leaving behind a barren landscape where trust struggled to take root. He clenched his jaw, the familiar ache in his chest, a dull throb. Lucky whickered, pulling Dusty from the past. The horse was more than just a mount. He was a silent confidant, a warm presence in a world that often felt cold. Dusty reached down, his calloused hand stroking the horse's coarse mane. "Easy there, old friend," he murmured, his voice a low rumble, seldom used. Lucky's ears twitched, acknowledging the quiet affection. As dusk bled across the sky, painting it in streaks of violet and rose, Dusty finally reined in Lucky beside a cluster of stunted mesquite. The air cooled swiftly, bringing with it the crisp scent of dry earth and impending night. He dismounted with an economy of motion, his movements fluid, despite his long day in the saddle. He unsaddled Lucky, brushed him down with practiced hands, and hobbled him loosely, ensuring he had access to the sparse, tough grass. He built a small fire, the crackling flames, a welcome counterpoint to the deepening silence. He warmed a can of beans, the aroma mingling with the faint scent of wood smoke. Eating slowly, he watched the stars emerge, one by one, like diamonds scattered across a velvet cloth. Each tiny pinprick of light seemed to hold a universe, vast and unknowable. He felt a familiar yearning, a longing for something he couldn't quite articulate, a connection, a purpose beyond simply enduring. He'd spent so long running from what he'd lost. He'd forgotten how to reach for what he might find. The desert, for all its emptiness, reflected the hollow space inside him. He pulled his blanket tighter, the vastness of the night pressing in, and settled down to sleep, the fire's dying embers his only company. A desert discovery. The sun, a fiery anvil, beat down on the cracked earth. Dusty, astride his paint mare, followed the faint tracks of a wagon, an anomaly in this desolate expanse. He wasn't looking for trouble, just an explanation for the disturbance in his quiet world. The tracks led to a scene of disarray, a broken wheel, splintered wood, and the lingering scent of fear. A single figure lay crumpled beside the wreckage, almost swallowed by the dust. He dismounted slowly, his hand resting on the worn grip of his revolver, though a quick glance confirmed the wagon was empty of any immediate threat. The figure was a woman, an unexpected sight in this unforgiving land. Her dress, though torn and dirt-stained, spoke of a life far removed from the grit of the desert. Fine lace peeked from beneath a rent in the bodice, and her shoes, delicate things, were a stark contrast to the rough boots he wore. Left for dead, he thought, a familiar ache settling in his chest. He knelt, his gaze sweeping over her. A nasty gash bled sluggishly at her temple, and her breathing was shallow, ragged. He checked for broken bones, his touch surprisingly gentle for hands accustomed to rough work. Her wrist was cold, but a faint pulse thrummed beneath his fingers. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that leaving her was not an option. His solitude, a carefully constructed shell, felt suddenly porous. The desert held no mercy for the weak, but Dusty, despite his own burdens, still possessed a spark of humanity that refused to let her perish. Lifting her was a delicate dance. He was careful of her head, supporting her neck as he hoisted her over his saddle. She was surprisingly light, a testament to her ordeal. The ride back to his hidden cabin was a slow, agonizing trek under the relentless sun. Each jarring step of the mare sent a fresh wave of anxiety through him. Finally, the familiar outline of his cabin emerged from the shimmering heat. He carefully eased her from the saddle, carrying her inside and laying her on his cot. The small Spartan room offered little comfort, but it was shelter. He fetched his worn medical kit, the contents a collection of practical remedies. He cleaned her wound with careful precision, the sting of the antiseptic making her stir, a soft moan escaping her lips. He then covered her with a thin, worn blanket, the only one he possessed. As he watched her, her chest rising and falling with each shallow breath, a quiet resolve settled over him. His life had just become irrevocably complicated, whispers and wonders. The flickering firelight painted shifting shadows across Sarah's face as her eyelids fluttered open. Her gaze, still hazy, settled on Dusty's silhouette against the desert night. He was stirring a pot over the flames, the aroma of simmering beans filling the air. "Morning," he mumbled, without looking up. His voice was rough, but not unkind. Sarah tried to sit up, a sharp pain in her ribs making her wince. Dusty was beside her in an instant, a calloused hand gently pressing her back down. "Easy, you took a nasty tumble. Where am I?" Her voice was raspy, barely a whisper. "My camp," he replied, handing her a tin cup of water. "Found you out near the Black Mesa. Lucky I did." She sipped slowly, the cool water a balm to her parched throat. "Thank you." Her eyes, now clearer, searched his face. "You saved me." He merely grunted, returning to his cooking. "Anyone I should tell you're all right? Family? Folks?" Sarah hesitated, a shadow crossing her features. "No one to tell. Not anymore." She paused, then added, "I was traveling, looking for something." "Something lost? Or something new?" Dusty asked, a rare spark of curiosity in his usually stoic gaze. A faint, almost wistful smile touched her lips. "Both, I suppose. A fresh start, away from complications." She offered no further explanation, and Dusty, respecting the unspoken boundary, didn't press. Yet her vague answers only deepened the mystery surrounding her, a puzzle he found himself unexpectedly drawn to solve. Her presence, a stark contrast to his usual solitude, was surprisingly comforting. Their quiet meal was interrupted by a scuttling sound from the periphery of their camp. A small, wiry figure, no older than 15, emerged from the darkness, a rusty knife clutched in his hand. His eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and desperation, fixed on their meager supplies. "Hand over your grub," the boy squeaked, trying to sound menacing. Dusty, without a word, rose to his full height. He moved with a quiet authority that belied his calm demeanor. The boy, caught off guard by the sheer size of him, faltered. "Go on, Git," Dusty rumbled, his voice low and firm. "There ain't nothin' here for you to steal." The bandit, emboldened by hunger, took a tentative step forward. "I ain't askin' twice." Before the boy could react, Dusty took a swift step, his hand shooting out to grasp the boy's wrist. The rusty knife clattered to the dust. Dusty twisted the boy's arm, not roughly, but with enough force to make him yelp. "You come back here again, son? and you'll regret it. Now, scat." He released the boy, who scrambled backward, picked up his knife, and vanished into the night as quickly as he appeared. Dusty returned to the fire, picking up his tin plate as if nothing had happened. Sarah watched him, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. He was more than just a quiet man of the desert. He was a protector, a silent, steadfast sentinel against the harshness of this world. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt truly safe. The wanted poster. A furious gale, a palpable presence, clawed at the cabin, rattling its flimsy windows like a hungry beast. Dusty, having just banked the embers that cast their final, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, flinched as a sudden, violent gust slammed something solid against the timber with a resounding thwack. Ever prepared, he snatched his rifle from its familiar pegs. The sound came again, a softer, insistent flutter this time. Cautiously, he unbarred the heavy door, a sliver of candlelight spearing the inky blackness. Pinned against the weathered planks by a stray splinter was a sheet of thick, stained paper. Not a leaf, not a branch, but something undeniably man-made. He peeled it off, his fingers registering the coarse texture. The flickering light from within illuminated a crudely rendered portrait, a snarling, scarred visage beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Wanted, Black Bart," the bold letters shrieked, "for robbery, arson, and murder." A glacial dread snaked down Dusty's spine. Black Bart. A name whispered in fearful reverence across the territory, a specter haunting even the bravest souls. Then his gaze dropped to the smaller, less detailed drawing beneath Bart's menacing image. "An accomplice," the caption stated. A woman. His breath hitched, an icy knot tightening in his gut. The familiar curve of her jaw, the subtle tilt of her chin, the startling clarity of her eyes. Even in the rough sketch, it was unmistakable. It was Sarah. The poster, now a crumpled mess in his shaking hand, felt like a brand. Sarah. His Sarah, the woman he'd plucked from the precipice of death, whose quiet strength had begun to mend the deep chasms in his solitary world. He stared at the drawing, then at the empty bunk where she usually slept, her few belongings neatly arranged. The innocence he'd perceived in her gaze, the gentle resilience in her hands. Had it all been a masterful deception? A meticulously woven lie? Fury, sharp and scalding, ignited within him, quickly followed by a crushing wave of betrayal. He had risked everything, battled the wilderness's wolves, shared his meager stores, offered her the sanctuary of his home and the fragile seed of a new beginning. And all the while, she was this confederate to a monster? The image of Black Bart's cruel leer merged with Sarah's gentle smile, twisting everything he believed he knew. The wind shrieked anew, a banshee wail through the cabin's chinks, mirroring the tempest raging within him. His nascent peace, so recently found, fractured into 1,000 splintered shards, a truth unveiled. The flickering gaslight of the saloon cast long, dancing shadows across Sarah's face. Her eyes, usually so guarded, were wide and glistening with unshed tears as she stared at the weathered "Wanted" poster tacked to the wall. It depicted a crude likeness of Black Bart, his sneering face instantly recognizable. Dusty, noticing her sudden stillness, moved closer, his hand hovering uncertainly near her shoulder. "You know him, don't you?" Dusty's voice was a low rumble, devoid of accusation. Sarah flinched, a sharp intake of breath, the only sound in the quiet corner. He ruined my life." The words were barely a whisper, thick with a pain that resonated deep within Dusty's own scarred heart. "My family, we were struggling. He came to our farm, promising work, a future. We were desperate, Dusty, so desperate we believed him. Her gaze finally met his, raw and pleading. He didn't offer work. He offered a choice: join him or watch everything we had burn. A cold knot tightened in Dusty's stomach. He'd seen desperate choices before, knew the bitter taste of regret. He forced you into banditry? His voice was strained, the question barely escaping his lips. Sarah nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. He'd make me scout, ride ahead, make sure the roads were clear. He said my innocent face wouldn't draw suspicion. I hated it. Every minute. Every time I felt like I was dying inside. She pressed a hand to her chest as if to physically quell the ache. Then, the stagecoach raid near Miller's Creek. She continued, her voice gaining a fragile strength. I saw a woman, a young mother, clutching her child. He was going to hurt them. I couldn't stand it anymore. I tried to stop him. Just a moment's hesitation, a warning shout. He turned on me, furious. Said I was a liability. Her eyes welled up again, a fresh wave of tears cascading down. He beat me, Dusty, left me for dead in the dust. Said I wasn't worth the bullet. Dusty's jaw tightened, a familiar fire kindling in his gut. The image of Sarah, broken and discarded, burned into his mind. He reached out, his calloused hand gently covering hers. You tried to save them, he said, his voice husky with emotion. You were trying to do what was right. Sarah's grip tightened on his, a fragile lifeline in the storm of her memories. I just want to make things right, Dusty. I want to live a life that makes up for what I was forced to do. Her gaze, though still tear-filled, held a flicker of hope, a desperate plea for understanding, and a chance at redemption. Hunters at the horizon. The sun, a fiery orb, dipped closer to the western ridge, painting the sky in hues of orange and bruised purple. Dusty, perched on the cabin's weathered porch, had been carving a crude wooden bird, the rhythmic scrape of his knife a familiar comfort. But a sudden glint miles out on the dusty plain arrested his hand. He squinted, his eyes, accustomed to vast distances, focusing on the shimmering horizon. 3 distinct silhouettes emerged, growing steadily larger. Riders. And not the friendly kind. The way they moved, purposeful and unyielding, sent a cold prickle down his spine. Sarah, he called, his voice a low rumble, devoid of its usual gentle cadence. She emerged from the cabin, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. What is it, Dusty? Her gaze followed his, her brow furrowed when she saw his grim expression. Hunters, he stated, his eyes never leaving the distant figures. 3 of them. And they're coming this way. A fleeting shadow crossed Sarah's face, a flicker of the fear she usually kept so well hidden. She knew the name Black Bart, knew the whispers that followed it, and she knew what bounty hunters meant. How much time? Dusty's jaw tightened. Not much. Maybe 20 minutes, if they don't push their horses too hard. He dropped the wooden bird and moved with swift, silent efficiency. Inside. Quickly. Everything that can give us away. They worked in a frantic, wordless dance. The small fire in the hearth was doused, the thin curl of smoke vanishing into the fading light. He swept away the tracks from her recent walk to the stream, while she gathered the few personal items they'd left scattered. Her embroidered shawl, his worn canteen. Even the faint aroma of freshly baked bread, Sarah's morning effort, seemed too loud, too revealing. He pushed the heavy wooden door shut, bolting it with a resounding thud. Their refuge was the small, root cellar beneath the cabin. Dusty pulled back the rug, revealing the trap door. The air within was cool and damp, smelling of earth and stored potatoes. Sarah descended first, her movements surprisingly agile. He followed, pulling the trapdoor closed above them, plunging them into near absolute darkness. Only thin slivers of moonlight, filtering through cracks in the cabin floorboards, pierced the gloom. They crouched in silence, side by side, their breaths shallow. The distant thud of hooves grew louder, closer. Each beat a hammer strike against the fragile peace of the wilderness. Dusty could feel Sarah's trembling beside him, a subtle shiver that resonated deep within him. He longed to reach out, to offer comfort, but any movement, any sound, felt like a betrayal. The air grew thick with unspoken tension, the scent of damp earth mingling with the sharp tang of fear. The thudding grew to a rhythmic drumming, directly above them now, and then a sudden, jarring halt. Silence. A profound, terrifying silence, broken only by the frantic thump of their own hearts. A prayer for redemption. The campfire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows that stretched and swayed with the whisper of the wind. Dusty stared into the embers, the heat, a familiar comfort against the cool desert night. His gaze drifted to Sarah, huddled on the other side of the small fire, her face etched with a weariness that mirrored his own. He'd seen that look before, in his own reflection, after mistakes that had almost broken him. He remembered the suffocating weight of guilt, the desperate yearning for a clean slate. This woman, falsely accused, deserved a chance he'd once thought he'd never get, a chance to start anew, unburdened by another's malice. He cleared his throat, the sound rough in the stillness. "I ain't turning you in, Sarah." Her head snapped up, eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and a fragile hope. "But the bounty—" "Damn the bounty," Dusty said, his voice firm. "You didn't do it, and I aim to prove it." He watched the tension ease from her shoulders, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. "We gotta catch Black Bart. That's the only way to clear your name." Sarah's gaze sharpened, a flicker of her usual resilience returning. "His hideout," she began, her voice low and steady. "It's an old prospector's shack, tucked away in the Devil's Backbone. Hard to find, even harder to get out of if you don't know the trails. He uses a series of canyons, almost like a maze, to approach it unseen from the north." She traced a pattern in the dirt with a stick. "There's only one real entrance to the shack itself, well guarded, but a blind spot exists on the west side, near the old collapsed mine shaft. He thinks it's too unstable for anyone to try." Dusty leaned forward, listening intently. "How many men usually with him?" "4, sometimes 5, Sarah replied, her brow furrowed in thought. "He keeps most of his loot in a strongbox, hidden under the floorboards of the shack. He's obsessed with it." A plan began to form, a daring gambit. "We need to draw him out, or at least get him distracted." Dusty mused, his mind racing through possibilities. "If we can sneak in through that blind spot, we could get to the strongbox, rig something up, take his greed, and turn it against him." Sarah nodded, a spark of cunning in her eyes. "He's a vain man, too, loves to boast. We could send word, a false tip about a shipment of gold moving through the Blackwood Pass, something too tempting for him to ignore." "While he's chasing ghosts," Dusty finished, a grim smile touching his lips. "We'll be waiting in his own den. It's risky, but it's our best shot at redemption." The desert air grew colder, but a new kind of warmth settled between them, a shared purpose against the encroaching darkness. The showdown. The dilapidated shack, perched precariously on the ridge like a forgotten tooth, exhaled a faint plume of acrid wood smoke into the crisp evening air. Dusty dismounted, his boots crunching on loose shale, the familiar weight of his rifle a cold comfort in his grip. Sarah, her face a mask of grim determination, followed suit, her eyes scanning the shadowed windows. "This is it," she whispered, the words thin against the rising wind. "He's inside." Dusty nodded, his gaze fixed on the front door, half-rotted and hanging askew on a single hinge. He gestured for Sarah to stay back, then moved with the silent grace of a hunter, his presence melting into the twilight. A guttural laugh, followed by the clinking of bottles, drifted out from within. Black Bart was celebrating, oblivious to the storm brewing at his doorstep. With a swift kick, Dusty sent the door splintering inward, revealing a scene of squalor and drunken revelry. 4 figures, Bart among them, startled, their faces contorting from amusement to alarm. Bart, a half-empty whiskey bottle still clutched in his hand, snarled, "Well, well, if it ain't the stray dog, come back for another bite." Dusty's voice, low and steady, cut through the sudden silence. "It's over, Bart." Bart's answer was a blur of motion. The whiskey bottle arced through the air, shattering against the far wall as he lunged, a rusty knife glinting in his hand. Dusty sidestepped the wild thrust, the blade whistling past his ear, and countered with a powerful right hook that sent Bart staggering back against a rickety table. Bottles and playing cards scattered. As the other ruffians moved to intervene, a high-pitched whistle pierced the air. Sarah, having crept around to the side window, hurled a rock wrapped in oil-soaked cloth. It sailed through the broken pane, landing with a thud amidst the confusion. A moment later, a thin trail of smoke began to curl from the cloth, a pungent, acrid smell filling the small room. "What in tarnation?" one of Bart's men choked, his eyes watering. Bart, momentarily disoriented by the smoke and Dusty's relentless assault, stumbled. Dusty seized the opportunity, his movements fluid and precise. He disarmed Bart with a sharp twist of the wrist, the knife clattering to the floor. Then, with a quick, practiced maneuver, he spun Bart around, pinning his arms behind him. "The back room, Dusty!" Sarah yelled, her voice hoarse from the smoke. "The strong box is under the loose floorboard, near the fireplace!" Bart thrashed, but Dusty's grip was unyielding. The smoke thickened, burning the eyes and throat. Bart's remaining men, overcome by the fumes, began to cough violently, their attempts to fight growing weaker. Sarah, ever the strategist, had used her intimate knowledge of the hideout to her advantage. Dusty tightened his hold, a grim satisfaction settling over him. The predator was finally caught, a new beginning. The dust swirled around Black Bart's bound figure as Dusty pushed him roughly towards the approaching buckboard. Sheriff Brody, a man whose weathered face seemed carved from the same hardscrabble landscape, watched with a grim satisfaction. Deputy Miller, a lanky youth barely out of his teens, kept his rifle trained on the notorious outlaw. Bart, his eyes blazing with impotent fury, spat a stream of curses at Dusty. "You'll regret this, cowboy. I'll find you," he snarled, straining against the ropes. Dusty merely grunted, a quiet rumble in his chest. "Don't reckon you will, Bart. Not where you're going. Row." He pushed the outlaw forward, and the deputies hauled him onto the buckboard, securing him further. Sheriff Brody turned his attention to Sarah, his gaze assessing. "And you, ma'am? What's your involvement in all this?" Sarah met his stare, her voice steady despite the lingering tremors in her hands. "My name is Sarah Miller. Bart, he abducted me after my family was killed by his gang. He held me captive, forced me to travel with them." Her explanation was concise, devoid of self-pity, and carried the ring of truth. She recounted the details of the ambush, the days of terror, and finally, her desperate escape and Dusty's timely intervention. Brody listened intently, occasionally nodding. He knew of Bart's cruelty, the whispers of his ruthlessness. He looked at Dusty, then back at Sarah, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Your story checks out, ma'am. We found evidence of a struggle at the old ranch, Just as you described, and Bart's been wanted for a good many years. You're free to go." He gave Dusty a respectful nod. "Good work, son. You've done this territory a service." As the buckboard rumbled away, carrying Black Bart towards a future of iron bars, a profound silence settled over the two figures left behind. The desert, usually so vast and indifferent, felt strangely intimate. Sarah turned to Dusty, a soft smile gracing her lips. "Thank you, Dusty, for everything." He shifted his weight, his gaze sweeping across the horizon, where the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. "Just did what was right, Sarah." His usual reticence was still there, but a new lightness seemed to emanate from him. The heavy burden he'd carried for so long felt a little less crushing. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice tinged with a hopeful anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Dusty finally met her eyes, a rare, genuine smile slowly spreading across his face. "Now, we build something honest. I know a stretch of land, good for a small spread. We can get some livestock, maybe even a garden." He gestured to the vast, open land around them, a vision forming in his mind. No more running. No more hiding. Just us. Sarah's heart swelled. The harsh desert, once a place of fear and despair, now held the promise of a future, a new beginning forged from shared hardship and unexpected kindness. She reached out, her hand finding his. His calloused fingers closed around hers, a silent pact made under the endless sky. The journey ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone.